Okay, well, hello, everybody. Thank you for viewing this training, first of all. If you're watching this video, that means you have been invited or identified as a participant in the Gemstar monthly process audit program. This little presentation is going to tell you about that. It's going to outline for you what you can expect when you come up to Building 7 to participate. And kind of just outlines the process and gives a little bit of background to why we're doing this and what you can expect moving forward. So the first thing I'd like to kind of talk about is a definition, and it centers around a main ISO requirement, and that is that organizations need to be using what's called the process approach with how they view their organization. In a way, it's taking a look at the processes that you have and not isolating them as, standalones, but really how do they integrate and how do they fit together? So an analogy I like to use to describe the process approach is a very simple one. Take a look at this pen on the screen. You can see all of the different elements of that pen blown apart. You've got the tip of the pen, you have a spring, the ballpoint, the ink chamber, the thrusting device, so on and so forth. So each of these elements has its own function, has its own design, but in and of themselves does not bring much value to the pen as a whole. It's only when it is fully assembled and we view it as a fully functioning unit that we can see that it functions as designed. And the same is true with the process approach. So we can move on and explain a little bit more about that. By definition, a process, when you think of a process, it's a set of interrelated activities, which takes inputs and transforms them into outputs. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a really simple diagram of that. ISO tells organizations that they need to take care with identifying their processes, identifying the inputs and outputs of each of them, how they interact with other processes. And then these two red circles here, ISO says that we also have to establish measuring criteria. We have to evaluate our processes and go back and ascertain how well they're doing. The reason we do that is this last circle here. It's to drive continuous improvement. So the reason why we're doing process audits at Gemstar is to kind of focus on these two pieces right here. Establishing that measuring criteria, how are we evaluating our systems and our processes? And then from there, based on the results that we gather, how are we improving? ISO tells us that we need to look at all of our processes in this way. Anything that's value adding, anything that affects the quality or the customer satisfaction really should fall within this umbrella of the process approach. So we look at audits in the same manner. Okay, so just a little background there on the process approach. I want to tell you about 3 specific types of audits. We have basically first, second, and third party audits. What this presentation is going to focus on is first party audits, or rather the internal audits. That's when an organization audits its own processes against whatever criteria or standard they have, come up with to measure against. And that's what the process audits at Gemstar are all about. There are internal processes. A second party audit is another way to say basically a customer audit. It's when a customer comes in and audits us. It could be when we are auditing a supplier or a potential supplier. So second party audits are based around customers. Then you have a third party audit, which is an independent audit. It's mostly done by, an external accreditation body, or think of a regulatory agency like ISO, for example, who came in and gave us our CERT audit, or even OSHA or FDA are some examples. So different types of audits, they all have different, criteria, different scope. Just so you aren't confused with what we're doing here. This isn't a mini ISO audit. This is just technically a first party internal audit. ISO tells us that we need to plan at certain intervals that we decide when we're going to conduct internal audits, when we're going to conduct that evaluation and monitoring and measuring how well our processes and systems are doing. So as you can see here on the screen, this is the projected process audit schedule for the rest of the year for Gemstar. One of the things you'll notice on here is that we're focusing primarily right now on production processes, but in the future, that could include any process here. It could be maybe the design process. It could be an audit of training or how effective our training is. Could be on a metric like on-time delivery. A key thing with what we're calling Gemba process audits is that it includes a member of top leadership. So here's our schedule. You can see the folks listed there, and then our own internal auditors, and then the projected schedule. For those of you who maybe haven't seen this, I will send it out again to everybody on this list so you kind of know the projected schedule. We do, make tweaks here and there if we need to. We'll communicate those as needed, but you'll be sure to have this in your hands and know well in advance of when you're scheduled to participate. So when we talk about Gemba auditing, I kind of coined a term called Gemba audit. It really combines the best of a Gemba walk with a process audit. If you remember, the term Gemba is a Japanese term. It means going to the source. And that's exactly what these audits are designed to do. They are not as intense as a full-on, certification third-party audit. They're meant to be short. They're meant to be more informal. They're a chance for top leadership to come to the Gemba, to see what we're doing, to observe some processes. What we're doing in a Gemba process audit is seeking to understand, why things are done the way they are. We're checking out the different activities, whether they're value added and what's working, what isn't working. Is there anything in the process that's maybe subtracting value? Why is that? And of course, the reason why we're doing it is right here, this big chunk at the end. It's to drive that continuous improvement. Are there, any conditions we could improve? Maybe there's some improvements to tools, equipment, the environment, or maybe a procedure needs to be updated, so on and so forth. It's all about improvement. And a Gemba process audit is a great way to get management engaged at all levels and add value to what we're doing. So in anatomy of the Gemba process audit, you're going to see when you come up here that we have a checklist developed in advance. Now, we've learned something. When we first started off, we were using a canned checklist. We were going to use that format for auditing every audit at every area and never change or tweak it. Well, how value added is that? So we decided to change up the format. What you're going to see is short checklists, about 15 to 20 questions. Also, a Gemba audit is going to make sure that we have objective, impartial auditors. That's part of the reason for this presentation. We want to make sure that you have an overview of what's going on and learn some tips. The point of it, remember, is capturing what's going well as any opportunities for improvement. So it isn't really a finger pointing, this is wrong and we need to fix it. It's more of a observe what's going on and record the good things as well as the opportunities to improve. Internal audits at the Gemba are going to be scheduled monthly. And then this is really important here, this follow-up piece. That's something that you typically don't see and some organizations struggle with. In the event that an audit is conducted and maybe it results in some sort of corrective action, what we really are planning on doing and we should be doing is following up on those corrective actions to see whatever was put into place, whether or not it was still effective. So you can kind of see the process approach in this, in that the outputs of a process audit can sometimes become the inputs of a follow-up audit. So it's all connected. It's kind of cool the way it all works. Basic audit questions that you'll see on the checklist are variations of these types of things. Now they are tweaked more specifically to the shop floor area, but stuff like, tell me, what are you doing? What are you trying to do? How do you make this process happen? Questions like, how do you know that you're doing this right? What's your gauge? What's your measurement? Tell me about your inspection process. How do you know this is the best way to do something? How do you know it's the right thing to do? So it's investigatory. It's taking a closer look at just how things are done. So now I want to get into some best practices when you come up and participate and help us with these audits. Some things to say right off the bat. One is that we want to not look at this as just a formality where we're just checking off a bunch of boxes or asking questions or checking them off. Okay, that one's done, moving on. There really is intent behind this. And again, it's all about CI, all about improving. But some practical tips for when you come up, you'll be paired up with another person, so you'll be in a team. One of the things that we've seen that works well is to split those audit questions up in advance. You'll arrive a little bit early. I'll be doing a debrief with you in the lunchroom to kind of go over the audit checklist, split up those questions, and it's best really if one person engages while the other person takes notes and kind of records the responses. It's sort of difficult to do both and really be attentive to the person speaking. So if you can tag team and switch off, that's great. So then we can make sure that we get the highest value input from the folks. Another good tip is to ask open-ended questions. The checklist is designed that way. It's worded that way. You can read it verbatim or you can paraphrase. It's up to you, but it's better to use those open-ended questions. For instance, describe for me your process, or show me what you're doing there, or tell me about a time when you had a non-conforming part, what you do. Want to steer away from asking things in such a way or presenting them in such a way that could yield just a yes or no answer, and it doesn't really give you the feedback that you're looking for. As far as audit etiquette goes, we are wanting to stress that, and we're telling the shop floor employees this as well, that this is really informal. So it's important to put the auditee at ease. They have been prepped for this, but they may still be nervous seeing you on the shop floor. And be conversational, friendly, whatever it takes to set them at ease. Expressing a genuine interest and respect for their expertise. I've been telling them it's a way and a chance for them to show and tell a little bit about what it is that they do and what they do best here, and to explain it. So yes, they are all eyes on them at the moment. What we want to avoid, third bullet, and this one is difficult, is any problem solving or root cause analysis during this stage of the audit. It's important that we don't start consulting or we don't start offering solutions. It's hard to do if you are, immersed in lean thinking or continuous improvement. It's hard not to put that problem solving hat on. That will come, but that will come later at the end of the audit. At this stage of the game, you're just fact gathering. You are asking questions, engaging in conversation, and then recording what you hear and recording the feedback. Be prepared, I kind of touched on this, to paraphrase the audit checklist if needed. Now, we've tried to word the questions on there to read easily, but some folks, may have difficulty due to nerves or whatever with, understanding. So be prepared to rephrase stuff in a way that, is a little bit easier to digest if it seems like there's a bit of a barrier. Here's just a quick view of the audit checklist. So, and never fear, I will be sending them out to you well in advance. You will see, we will even ask for your feedback on what sorts of questions to include, but this is a general layout of what you would see. So you have a description on the left here. Those are the questions that we're asking, the types of things we're probing into. In the middle here in red, it's kind of a guide for you and kind of a gauge. So the types of things we're looking for, the types of evidence or the types of awareness or understanding, could be tangible things like documentation. So it does kind of help guide you with interpreting the question and even paraphrasing if you need to later. And then there's space on the right-hand side there to mark any observations or comments that you have, which then turns into later your audit findings, and we'll talk about that in a second. So just a little view of the audit checklist. As far as your findings go, now this is interesting. There are several categories of findings, and it's important to note that, when dealing with what we call a non-conformance, you're either going to end up with what we say is an NC, short for non-conformance, an OFI, which stands for opportunity for improvement. You're going to end up with notes that maybe indicate a positive finding, something that's going well. During the actual audit, we're going to want to focus on taking accurate notes and, again, just sticking to the facts, recording what you see. After the audit is done, that's when you can analyze and then come up with exactly how to classify the findings. So some definitions on what a nonconformance is. Major nonconformances play, I guess, a larger part in the ISO QMS third-party type of audits. I'm not going to go too deep into them, but I did want to include them here because when we're doing audits at the process level, they can rear their ugly head and they may reveal themselves. So it's important to know how to classify them. As far as look over there on the right, something's classified as a major nonconformance if you are seeing or noticing a repeated occurrence of the same minor issue, if it amounts to a sufficient gap in the process or system, if it's causing product or service failure. They're raised when an issue has been identified that has caused an NC to occur that has affected the customer. So something has trickled down and we've got a negative result there. When potential impact has been identified as high risk, you could classify something as a major nonconformance. Or anytime you see a complete departure from the requirements. Now, in our application here, because this is just a first-party audit, the requirements are basically what we see on the checklist. The requirements could be documentation, could be standard work instructions, processes, procedures. When we see a departure from those things, the standards that Gemstar has identified, we can feel okay about classifying that as a major nonconformance. Minor nonconformances, on the other hand, are used when the problem is maybe an isolated occurrence. You don't sense or see evidence of a pattern. Nothing that the person you're speaking to, indicates that it's an ongoing thing. If the problem doesn't impact the quality or service to the customer, maybe it's a one-off. It's not good, but it didn't affect the customer. Minor nonconformance could be used if something creates little or no waste. So there's another gauge for you, like with lean terminology, identifying waste. Or if the problem doesn't appear to be a trend. So it's kind of how you tell the difference between the two of them there. OFIs go. OFIs are opportunities for improvement. Those are the things that don't meet the criteria for a nonconformance, but really are the result of when you combine your analysis against the audit standard or criteria. Maybe you use some common sense, you use the skills you have as an auditor. OFIs are discussed at the closing meeting, so at the end of the audit. And then they're categorized according to potential risk and impact. And I'll show you that here in a second. So what is an OFI? Well, it's something that's value adding. It could be an opportunity identified to change or tweak something that results in an improvement to safety, to quality, to simplicity, or speed. It could also be an observation raised when a perceived issue has been identified that could, if it came into effect, cause a nonconformance to occur if it was left unattended. Okay, so again, this is where it's going to depend on who the auditors are. It's going to depend on how you analyze things, how you connect the dots. But OFIs are good, and we expect some to come out of every audit. Just wanted to tell you the difference there. Now, with the process first party, we're going to see more of this type of finding than we would expect to see non-conformances. And that's just because of the standard we're measuring against, right? A third-party audit, we are measuring against the ISO standard, which is pages and pages and pages of clauses and thou shall and thou shall nots, so on and so forth. So you kind of get the gist there. Simplest way to put it, when you're filling out the checklist at the end of the audit, when you're compiling all of your notes and so on, we want to include both the positive things, the things that are happening that are going well, that are great, as well as any negative findings, so things that are not happening. Okay, positive, things that are happening, negative, things that are not happening. And when you see that checklist, it'll make a little bit more sense there. Okay. Again, here's another glimpse of it. So this is the description. Let's just take one, for instance. Do you know the Gemstar quality policy and objectives? What do they mean to you in your own words? Now it's up to you. You can read the question to the individual, or you could, say, hey, tell me about the quality policy. What does it mean to you? Or what have you? So in this column here, this tells us what we're looking for, the reason for asking the question. Means we're looking for an awareness that the individual has, that they have an understanding of the quality policy and objectives. And this column here was where we recorded the answer or the feedback, the notes of how that question was answered. Okay, so you kind of get the gist. It goes really quickly. I mean, we've scheduled probably more time than we need, although at the end for the analysis, sometimes it's good to have some extra time built in to kind of go over everything and solidify stuff. But the actual conversation or visit to the work center doesn't actually take that long. We keep it, remember, 15 to 20 questions max. So as far as next steps go, so the audit is completed, you've had your conversation, you've asked the questions, then you do convene briefly to kind of compile your notes and your findings. Okay, at the end of the audit checklist, you're going to see this little guy here. It's the prioritization tool. It's really a risk matrix, which says, hey, if there are any OFIs or NCs that came out of this audit, you then evaluate them and you pop them into this little chart down here. Now that can be done at the closing meeting. That could be something that the internal auditor works on. Work it out between you and your partner how you want to do it. Generally speaking, it's just marrying together the notes and compiling those findings, identifying any super high risk CAs that jump out at you at the moment. After that's done, the checklist and the notes are all compiled. They're submitted to the QMS coordinator, and that's what I do here for Gemstar. Once that's done, I'm taking that information, I'm compiling it into a formal audit report, and I'm getting that officially documented in Unipoint, which is our quality management system software. After that happens, a closing meeting is then scheduled with the process owner, where that audit report is presented to them, and then they're basically given a summary of the findings. Any high risk findings that this process audit revealed are then compiled and discussed at the next management review, if they're, really, really high risk. And then the follow-up and review of any corrective actions that came out of these process audits, that's also scheduled and conducted as needed. So again, that's really closing the loop. That's going back and it's saying, okay, the corrective actions taken, were they effective? And it's auditing the corrective actions. So it's kind of a constant cycle and a constant loop, constant PDSA. It's a way to consistently improve. And once this gets going, I'm really excited for how it's gonna help us to hone in on the things that matter and organize how we improve. Alrighty, so almost done here. So finally, as I mentioned, those checklists are going to be sent out to you in advance. Now we will ask for any feedback, and once you've had a chance to review it, if there's anything on there that, or I should put it this way, if there is anything not on there that you would like included, we'd love to get the feedback. We've asked several, and it's helped shape the checklists that we have, but we're certainly all about improving them. So if there's an angle or something, you know, objective speaking that we really want to focus on, please feel free to submit that and we'll get that added in. Again, when it's your scheduled time, we do have some time built in for this. So you're going to be arriving a little bit early, meeting in the lunchroom. We're going to go over a quick debrief. We're going to look at that schedule, we'll split up the questions and just, I'll take you out to the floor, introduce you, and then let you have at it. Make sure that you're meeting briefly at the end to discuss your findings and compile any notes, especially if more than one person has been the note taker. That way, you know, ideas are still fresh and things can be communicated that way. And then, as I mentioned, that closing meeting with the process owner will be scheduled for the future. Now, if you're a member of top management, that isn't imperative that you attend that meeting. You may be seeing a meeting request come through with your attendance being optional, but we would have our internal auditor, lead auditors here close that meeting out with the process owner to discuss the findings. Okay, so that was a lot in a nutshell. But I did just want to give you an overview of just what is this all about rather than scheduling you to come up and walking into something maybe not, you know, fully grasping the entire scope. So thank you so much in advance for your willingness to participate. It's going to make us better. We're real excited about the improvements that we can make starting this off. So thank you for your time. Have a great day.